All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the October presentation. Tonight we have Tom Nemeth joining us once again. Thank you, Tom, for coming all the way out from Pennsylvania to be with us. Tom is a longtime friend of Tri-State. I believe he might even be on the incorporation paperwork, to be honest.
It was 72.
Yeah, so Tom's coming with us tonight with a presentation on the CNJ from Elizabeth to Raritan. So Tom is also the editor-in-chief of Railpace Magazine. I'm sure some of you are subscribers and enjoy the fruits of his labor. But with that, Tom, the floor is yours.
Okay. All right, I'll give you a little quick update about the program. It runs about an hour, so I'll try and make it quick. The good news is this is a program that is a show. It presents itself in the respect that I don't have to click on anything. So we won't be belaboring any particular pictures. It's done in a Photo Magico format. That's the name of a show that puts your digital scans together and makes it into a coherent presentation. There's no music and there's no narration except me. So I'll try and keep the narration minimum. And if I get this thing to work, see, what are we doing here? Richie changed my screen around here.
It's gonna click play, right?
Yeah, up here, play. And then we want to play full screen. Okay. Oh, gotta hit one more button here. Okay, does it work? Yes, it works. It's amazing. Yeah, there's always that moment of, oh God, I hope it works. Okay, this is the CNJ from Elizabeth to Raritan. I have other shows like Jersey City to Elizabethport and also Raritan west to Allentown, but those are separate shows. So this one has a mix of original heritage Jersey Central, meaning before the Aldine plan, and also Aldine plan pictures. It doesn't have New Jersey Transit or New Jersey Dot or any of that. So we start out in Elizabeth, New Jersey. It's the county seat of Union County. And we head west. That's a topo map from 1967. Elizabethport is over on the right, but we're not going to cover that in this show. And this slide will change. There it goes. So here is in the 1970s, when we had the Aldine plan, you had the Bayonne Scoot. That's the two Bud cars. And that is an HH 600 at Elizabeth in the yard there near Spring Street Tower. It was live too. That was not dead. This is the ES 98. It's a train that ran from Scranton to Elizabethport. Now, this is a shot from like 1963 when I was still in high school. That's at Elizabeth where the Pensy crosses over the CNJ. And that's not my shot. I think that's Bill Brennan's shot. But it's pretty impressive angle there. And here's a later shot that I took where you have a CNJ Aldine plan train running on the Pensy into Newark. It's one of their shore trains. Here's another shot in downtown Elizabeth when people used to go shopping down there. Here's another shot. This is just west of Elizabeth Station. We had a 4-track main line there. There's nothing there. Now you're going to say, if CNJ had ridership like that on a regular basis, they'd be making money. And that was obviously for a fan trip. And they also had these, during the Aldine era, had Pennsylvania Reading Seashore Lines Bud cars. There's what that crowd of people was waiting for. A T1 and an excursion to Bethlehem. You can see there's quite a mob scene there. There's nothing there anymore. Had to be in the 70s. After the Aldine plan was in 67. Just a couple more shots. This is just west of Elizabeth. An Erie Lackawanna caboose on one of the ES 98s. Now, the next station west from Elizabeth was Roselle. One side said Roselle, The station on the other side said Roselle Park. And that's a midday mail train, so that had to be 1965 or earlier. The Aldine plan started on May 1st, 1967. So April 30th was a Sunday, and they actually ran the Aldine plan rush hour on a Sunday as a test to make sure everything would work. So here's one of the CNJ ferry boats that was replaced by the Aldine plan. They didn't need the CNJ Marine fleet anymore. Instead, they ran their battered fleet into Penn Station, Newark. And there's a Conrail engine, so this had to be after 1976. That's Aldine, that's Harrison Yard. That's where the Aldine plan trains ran instead of going to Jersey City Terminal. And it was trains from both the shore, the New York and Long Branch, and trains from Raritan on the main line. And this is back in the days when you could just walk around and you wouldn't get arrested or shot or anything. And the Reading ran two trains in on weekdays, the Crusader and the Wall Street. Both of them were RDCs. And if those RDCs look familiar, that's because they're on the Reading and Northern now. And this was in the era when the CNJ was starting to get used passenger equipment through New Jersey DOT to replace the old junk liner standard coaches. There's the Reading Wall Streeter coming in, an old PATH train going by on the right-hand side. And that's from the Harrison PATH platform. That's where these pictures are taken from. That's when Hyatt Bearings was over in Harrison, when things were actually made in the United States. And there is a short train, and you notice it has a club car in there. So even after the Aldine plan, CNJ still had some of their subscription cars or club cars, mostly on the shore runs. And this was called the Hunterdon Hills Express. It was 4 or 5 bud cars. And this is a Raritan-bound train going by Hunter Tower on the Pensy main line, switching onto the connecting track, which is what the trains do today, the Raritan Valley Line trains. And that is a train heading down the Jersey Shore. So he'll go to Rawway and diverge onto the Perth Amboy and Woodbridge branch of the Pensy. Now this is another shot at Elizabeth, South Elizabeth, actually. That's a shore train coming east. As this station stop is gone now. That's right where the big curve is in Elizabeth. And here's another shot in Elizabeth, actually at the main Elizabeth station, which has been twice rebuilt. It's now high-level platforms. And this is down by Linden at an area called 6 Roads. It's called 6 Roads because there's 6 tracks. And there's actually 7 because there's a freight track over on the left. Now, this was the first day of operation, April 30th, on a Sunday when they were running these test trains. Nice, clean push-pull car there. They had 3 of them. And here's 4 bud cars. A billboard for the Robert Treat Hotel in Newark. Another shot with a different cab car. This is when Jersey Central got into push-pull operations. It was kind of interesting too, because the engineers had to get used to how to work push-pull. If you were sitting in the coach and they notched out at a station, you got a real jolt. In later years, they painted the junk liner cars into a New Jersey DOT scheme of like tan and blue. It was supposed to be yellow, but it was really tan. And this is at the Roselle Park station on the Lehigh Valley main line, which replaced the station you saw earlier on the old Jersey Central main line. And that's what's called Roselle Interlocking. This station is still here. These tracks are still here. This is the way the Jersey Central Aldine plan trains run. Here's a train coming down the ramp. When they built the ramp, everybody said, oh, a train's never going to be able to get up that grade. Well, they never had a problem. They just walked right up it. And here's the Jersey Builder, so-called because they got a bunch of Empire Builder cars from Burlington Northern. So they had 3 or 4 different paint schemes. Here's a cab view out of a Bud car, passing another Bud car with XC Tower in Cranford in the background, right above the Bud. There's another shot. Now that's the Bayonne Scoot. When they didn't have enough Bud cars running, they would use a push-pull car and a coach. And once a year, they would wash them. So this ran from here to West A Street in Bayonne. And that's
What cars have designated routes or they
Yeah.
use whatever?
the Bud cars. Well, in the early days, they were used on the main line between Raritan and Jersey City. There was a short period they actually ran to Allentown back in the early 60s. And I think they tried them once or twice on the shoreline, but there's too many grade crossings down there. That's kind of risky.
At one time, did they run down to Atlantic Highlands on the central?
Yeah, they did run Bud cars on the Atlantic. It was all the off-peak service was 1 or 2 Bud cars. And on weekdays, they had 2 green trains out of there. So here's some more NJ dot pictures. There's a Chessie train. After they abandoned Jersey City, they still ran freight out of Jersey City for a couple of years. Then they cut that back to Eport when they got rid of the Bayonne Bridge. And then they eventually got rid of that too. It was always a study in decay. Every year there was a little bit less than the year before. There's a Pennsylvania Reading Seashore Lines Bud car working the Bayonne Scoot. Okay, that's not my shot. That's a Dick Townley shot. And Dick had a hobby shop in Cranford. And I actually have his whole slide collection. And that was one of his best. That was a Reading T1 that he got, and he got a cab ride in that thing too, which was even better. So Cranford is the point where you re-enter the real Jersey Central main line west. It was 4 tracks all the way to Plainfield. At one time, it was 4 tracks all the way to Raritan. But from Bound Brook to Rock Interlocking in Plainfield, in the early 1960s, they shoemakered it to 3 tracks. And here's a shot in Cranford. Notice the little semaphore dwarf signal down on the bottom there on the left. And my favorite engines on the Central were the babyface Baldwins. I never got to see the double enders running. They quit in the 50s. And I started train watching in the 60s. And this was during the Timpani era. Timpani was one of the trustees of the bankrupt railroad. And he wanted to paint everything red, which was okay with me because that's a cool paint scheme. But to me, Jersey Central was always green with toothpaste stripes. That's under the Garden State Parkway in Cranford. So if you're into modeling, there's a Jersey Central boxcar. Here's a Bayonne Scoot coming into Cranford. At this time, you can see one of the mainline tracks in the middle there was ripped out. Here's a Reading freight coming through Cranford, coming eastbound. There were 6 tracks through the Cranford station. So this is not my shot. This is one that I acquired. And that's at Fanwood Scotch Plains Station. And that's not mine either. I think that's a Dick Townley shot too. And that's another shot. That station has been in several different paint schemes. It's still there. It's been rehabbed and it's like a municipal community center. But it's also a station stop. And the Raritan Valley Line stations, many of them are still low-level platforms. And that's when it was painted in the Jersey Central green. One side said Fanwood Scotch Plains, and the other side said Scotch Plains Fanwood, because that's where the dividing line was. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a Larry Green slide. A little bit blurry, but I can't do any better. So notice the semaphores on the bridge. Okay, now we're down to Plainfield. That's a 1955 map. So the Raritan Valley line ran northeast to southwest through Plainfield and Dunellen and then Middlesex. Now's when it's going to start getting interesting. It's not going to be all this Aldine plant stuff. You'll see some rarer early 1960s stuff that I took. Of course, you got to remember I was in high school, so getting around was more of an effort. Now, the B&O quit in April of 1958. But these are shots by Larry Green in Plainfield. And this was like the last month of operation. Now, these are pretty self-evident, but even at the end, the equipment seems to be very well taken care of and clean. This one here was the royal blue. Excuse me, because it says that on the rear observation. Yeah, there were several. There was the Royal Blue, the National Limited, Capital Limited, and there was one other. They had 4 trains, 4 each way. Most of them were in daylight too. I wish I was around in the late 1950s, because can you imagine seeing 8 trains in daylight on the B&O on the Central? I would just spend my life at Arcade Tower. Look at the paint job on that thing. There's a combine, little heavyweight coach there. Another shot of the Royal Blue going away. There's a dining car, 3rd car up. They just couldn't compete with the Pensy. Now CNJ had a lot of places where they set out mail cars for the postal service. Plainfield was one, and there was several others. Perth Amboy was another one. There were several places down the shore. There was a place in Middlesex. There was a siding in Middlesex where they set off baggage cars. This is at Plainfield. This was the midday mail train. There was one in each direction. And they had a couple of boxcars that were passenger-equipped online service. It means they could run them in a consist of a passenger train. They had steam lines. And that's a post-Aldine shot. The GP40Ps came in 1969. So when the Aldine plant started, they didn't even have the GP40s. They were still running with all the old junk. Now this is a post-Aldine shot. They still had FM train masters. There used to be a passenger layup yard in Plainfield, but they got rid of that in the mid-1960s. This is near Rock interlocking on the main line west of Plainfield Station. It was called Grant Avenue Station. It actually was a station stop, and only a handful of trains stopped here. If only they had watched their equipment, it would have looked like a classy operation. So we move west to Dunellen. At one time, there was also a commuter storage yard. Yeah, okay, this is not my shot. Once again, it's a Dick Townley shot. They had a small engine terminal on the north side of the track. And can you imagine seeing that? But as you can see, there's a passenger train stashed over on the right there. So at one time, the CNJ ran a lot of zone service. They had trains that went as far as Cranford and died. They had trains that went to Plainfield and died. They had one train that died at Dunellen, and then the rest all went to Raritan or farther west. They were big on camelbacks too, because they were essentially bi-directional. Wish I could have seen all this stuff. I usually saw that stuff. Now this is interesting. There's a Reading passenger train stuck right behind this guy, and there's a headlight down the track. So there was obviously something broke down that day, and they had trains lined up all over the place. The CNJ was also very easy to get cab rides on both engines and bud cars. You could just walk up to the front and say, mind if I look out the front? And they'd say, yeah, that's okay. And here's a rare shot of somebody actually doing maintenance. So we'll see a couple of wreck photos later. So Middlesex and Bound were the places that I hung out the most, Bound being the most. There was a passenger station at Middlesex, that's it. And there was one train a day to stop there, and I actually rode the train once from Bound to Middlesex. It was a flag stop, but I made them stop just because I wanted to do it. And it cost me 13 cents. So this is on the main line between Dunellen and Middlesex. And the 1178 is there. That's their observation car. NJ Transit still has it, unless URHS has it. But that was rented by some politician from Middlesex County who used to give political speeches off the back. So they parked it there every November. And in Middlesex, there was also GATX had a tank car repair facility by Mountain Avenue. We used to call it Tank Town. And here's the standard Middlesex grade crossing shot. Over on the left is the Lehigh Valley main line. There's the Lehigh Valley on the left. And the Jersey Builder over on the right. And they still had junk equipment back then too. It was great in the summer though, when you could ride with open windows. And here's, in the Timpani era, 2 red Jeeps on a morning eastbound commuter train. Some Jersey Builder cars filtered in there. Another shot with an FM. I loved the Fairbanks Morse engines. They were the best. The sound was just unbelievable. And there's a off-peak local with an RS3. And there's, before the Bud cars came, the Reading had FP7s on, that's the Crusader with 3 cars. The Wall Street was longer. And there's the Hunterdon Hills Express with 6 Bud cars. Normally it was 5. Sometimes it was 4 because one would be broken down. That one had 6. Another shot of the Crusader. And you can see there's a train going away in the background. Here's a couple of Penn Reading Seashore Lines Bud cars. After the Aldine plan, they found that the Jersey Central Bud cars were not in as good a shape as the PRSL Bud cars. Now there's Middlesex Station after the sign was removed. It's gone now. And after that mile marker is removed, I think it's probably in Frank Riley's basement. But this was back in 1962 when they ripped out the eastbound track 1 there, which is kind of a shame. And that siding over on the left, that's where they would park a mail car, a baggage car occasionally, and you'd see a postal truck in there. So this is on the big curve from Middlesex with Bound Brook behind me in this shot. CNJ also got a couple of F units in the later years in the late 1960s, probably 67, 68, off the B&O. He also got some F units off Norfolk Southern, or Norfolk and Western at the time. So they had a second generation of F units. There's that Hunterdon Hills Express down to 4 Bud cars. Notice the old whistle sign there. That's at the Mountain Avenue crossing in Middlesex. This is at Cedar Avenue. There were two grade crossings on the CNJ in Middlesex, and this was the other one. Great place to hang around when you were a kid on a bicycle to watch trains. There's a late afternoon mail train heading to Allentown, and a boxcar actually had a customer, which is a rare thing to see these days. Another pair of Aldine era trains. And toothpaste striped FMs still in Middlesex near the station. They only understood the concept of soap and water. Now the signal bridge is gone. This is at the Cedar Avenue grade crossing. This is coming around the big curve into Bound Brook. Now we're back up to 5 Bud cars again. The roofs of the Bud cars were not painted black. They were just filthy. Once in a while, they would wash one and you'd be astounded. The whole thing was silver. That's when you realize that the black roofs weren't painted black. Friendly engineer waving there. The Lehigh Valley over on the right there. Another shot of the Reading Crusader. And this day, I pre-drone shot. I just got brave and climbed on something to get a little elevation. Okay, so we were talking about maintenance. 1974, they had a little bit of a wreck in Middlesex. A little bit. Yeah. And anyway, those were the days when you could walk right up to a wreck site while they were working on clearing it, and nobody said, hey, you got to get out of here. There was just nobody throwing you out. So I went back the next day. The weather was considerably better. Usually wrecks only happen on terrible weather days. But here we had some Timpani red, and CNJ still had steam cranes. They had 3 of them, number 4, 5, and 6. And they had 2 of them down here. One was the Bethlehem service train. The other one was the original Jersey City service train, which would have been Eport by this time. I mean, look, you could just walk right up to it and take a picture, and nobody was like, what the hell are you doing here? It's a real steam crane. I guess Chessie was not happy about this. So they had one track open, so trains could get through, but it must have made a real mess with the rush hour. This actually went on for a couple of days because you can see different weather here. Same wreck, just different weather. Yeah, you could just walk right up and take pictures. Now, the hallowed grounds of Bound Brook, that's where I cut my teeth as a kid. I could take a bus from where I lived, the public service number 60 bus, down to Bound Brook, way before I could drive, and just spend a day watching what we called the greatest show on earth. It wasn't the Ringling Brothers Circus. It was Bound Brook Station. You had the Jersey Central, the Reading, B&O freight trains, and Lehigh Valley. You had 4 railroads, and it just kept on coming. Like every 15 or 20 minutes, there'd be a train. It wasn't like once an hour you'd see a train. Here's basically a map of the area. Bound Brook's over in the upper right-hand corner there where the yellow is. And the Reading goes down to the left, and the CNJ main line goes off to the upper left. That's 1947 map. But Bound Brook was great because there was a station there, and it was a town there, of course, so you can get a soda or a candy bar or something to make it through the day. And on weekdays, there was an agent there. So you could even buy a ticket or get timetables. And now that station building still exists, and it's a restaurant, Rosina's Restaurant. That crane over there is gone, but there was a little yard on the north side of the track too. And like there was a freight, like once an hour you'd see a freight train. It was just that busy. And then you had 2 passenger trains an hour, one each way. And then you had the Elk. The Elk was called the Chimney Rock Drill, and it worked 6 days a week. So there was always a switcher engine in Bound Brook, except when it ran up the branch to Chimney Rock. And the station building on the right has been rehabilitated by NJ Transit and is now open. There's nobody in there. It's just a waiting room. But in our day, it was open and it was steam heated. So in the winter, when it was tail freezing cold, like 4 degrees, you could go inside there and thaw out. And in the early 60s, the CNJ got a lot of the Lehigh, New England's equipment, boxcars and covered hoppers. So you saw a lot of them in their freights. This is the Bound Brook drill, also called the Chimney Rock drill. It was a small yard over on the right. There still are a few tracks over there. And back then, the mainline freights, which many of the eastbound mainline freights would stop in Bound Brook, drop and pick up cars and then proceed on. Now westbound, the freights didn't stop. They only did this eastbound. So when they did the pickup, I guess they took the cars to Elizabethport and then put them on a westbound train. There's a Reading FB1 in that consist. Just love those things. And they just sounded great too. I have an ABBA set, thanks to Tom Schmieder. They also invited you up in the cab often, a couple of times. In Jersey City, when we went down there, we'd get off the train on the platform and be walking up to the station so that we could walk up to the engine terminal. And the engineer would yell down, "Hey, you guys going out to the engine terminal?" Because they saw our cameras. And we said, yeah. He says, "Get on, it's a long walk." So instead of walking a mile, they rode us out there. We had that happen on the CNJ. We had the Reading F7s. They did it for us. Here's another maintenance train, which is like.
Did they ride you back to the terminal?
No, because they put their train away and then they went off duty, but we were so happy to be walking around because there was so much to see. Now, Baldwin's only MU'd with other Baldwins, so you couldn't run the DR15s with like the F3s or Fairbanks Morse Trainmaster. So that was interesting on the CNJ. They had air connections that were different than the electronic connections on most of the other engines. Look at all those CNJ hoppers over on the right. All clean too. What's interesting is when I was a kid and I saw the Baldwins, which you see there, I always thought that was a shade, they were painted gray, a shade of gray. They actually were green at one time, but they were so filthy and never washed that the paint scheme just appeared to be like gray and yellow. And there's the Elk. Now the passenger trains going eastbound always left at 23 after the hour. So if there was a mainline freight setting off or the drill engine, they knew that around that time of the day, you had to clear the station platform. You couldn't be blocking the train. Now that was rare to see an Alco S2 in Bound Brook because most of these small switcher engines hung around up in Jersey City and Elizabethport. But once in a while they got it. This was also rare, a 1500 horsepower FM, not a Trainmaster. These usually ran on the shorelines, trains, and but there were twice I caught them on the Raritan runs. So that was another thing that made rail fanning so much fun back then. You had GP7s, you had RS3s, you had the small FMs, you had the Trainmasters, and then you had Bud cars, of course. So you had quite a variety. You never knew it was going to be the same old, same old, same old. And then as the 60s progressed, you had shoemaker engines like that didn't have the stripes. There's a mail train. And then you had the ones that he hadn't gotten his sticky fingers on yet that still had the stripes. I don't think they ever washed their baggage cars since they were built, but this was at Bound Brook. So when you mailed something from the post office in Bound Brook, it went to the train station and got put on a train. Now there's an unshoemakered GP7.
Looks like that again.
Yeah, this one lasted the longest with the toothpaste stripes. Here's the same engine, but a different consist. There's a westbound train, so that had to be an Allentown train because baggage cars never went into Raritan Yard. So we went down to Bound Brook in the winter, the spring, the summer, the fall. It was just the greatest place to hang out. Nobody bothered you. There were no railroad cops. Nobody threw you off the railroad. you could get on a train and go somewhere like Jersey City or Elizabethport and take pictures. And I even went to Allentown once by train when I was like 14. I convinced my mom to get up at like 4:30 in the morning and drive me to Bound to catch the 5:23 train. It was a mail train that I rode to Allentown, which was slow, but I didn't care. I had an open window. Another shot at Bound Brook. Bound Brook once had 6 tracks, which was really amazing. 4 mainline tracks and 2 drill tracks. Now here's an interesting train. Looks like a mixed train, but it's actually a couple of coaches from Raritan just going to Eport for maintenance. Another road freight that had stopped and cut off. There's the Bound Brook drill. 15. It was a 6-day-a-week job, so even on Saturdays, you'd be entertained by this thing. Constantly going back and forth and back and forth. We could never figure out how we could take all day to switch out like 8 cars, but they did it. Now this was probably power from the Maybe. The Maybe was a train that ran from Eport to Phillipsburg and back. And it was called the Maybe because maybe it would run and maybe it wouldn't. That was what they really called it, the Maybe. But it usually did run. The other thing that was great about Bound Brook is you could see down the track about 3 miles, all the way past Arcade Tower. So if something was coming, you had plenty of time to get out and frame a shot or decide what angle you wanted to get. Now, you didn't usually see the 6-axle Alcos in New Jersey. They all worked out in Pennsylvania. But apparently this was a group that was being taken to Eport for work. I loved it when these things started up. The FM roar was just amazing. And here's a single header on a freight. There's 2 of them. This is just west of Bound Brook Station. And that's just, you can see where the fence is between the tracks. That's where the platforms are. But look at that. There's a headlight down there. There's a train here. There's a train behind me. It's just, now that's a Reading train. On Saturdays, there was 1 Reading train from Philadelphia to Jersey City and back. It was the Saturday Wall Street. It was 2 coaches. But you could ride it with a Jersey Central ticket. So if you got on at Bound Brook, you could ride to Jersey City and back for $2.40. But you could ride in the luxury of an air-conditioned Reading coach. Another shot of that mail train. Now here's an elevated shot. It's not a drone shot because we didn't have drones back then. It shows basically the 4-track main line, which is now 3 tracks. You can see farther down, it goes down to 3. The Lehigh Valley over on the right, that's looking east. And that's looking west. Oh, of course, there's a train coming. And that was the beauty of Bound Brook. There was always something coming. It wasn't like you sat there for an hour and a half waiting, nothing happening. Now, the Lehigh Valley was not very busy. In fact, they had a train that we called the time freight because it was the time freight. But it always came at 2:30 p.m. every day, like clockwork. Even on Sundays, it just came exactly at 2:30. So you always had to make sure you were over on the other side of the track to get your shot. Now here's young rail fans of the day. These guys are still around. It's Jimmy Russo in the red, Kevin Mosikis in the green, and a few other geeks. Some engineer asked me, that's me, asked me, you want your picture taken in the engine? Well, I didn't really want to waste a slide on myself, but he convinced me to do it, so I did it. And then this guy invited me up in the Baldwin. So as you can see, he's hanging back from the station, so he's not blocking passengers boarding the train. And the one thing about Jersey Central Bud cars that was amazing is when they started up, it looked like a forest fire. Now there's one with a semi-silver roof. About every 2 years, they'd wash the roofs. And would last about 2 weeks. There's a scale test car in there. Now, this was the old Lehigh Valley coal trestle in Bound The hill is still there. You can still get this shot. And of course, all the poles are gone. Whoops. Sorry about that. And that's the maybe going west with 2 Elks heading for Phillipsburg. And this is post-Conrail, obviously. Was very surprised to see an Erie Lackawanna RS3 drill in Bound Brook, but that's what was going on. And here's the Lehigh Valley time freight. It always came at 2:30 in the afternoon, so it was never front lit because the sun was swinging over into the west. But if you got over on the right side of the sun, you could still get a halfway decent shot. So these are FA2s. That other group was FA1s. They had both kinds. And they also had PAs. So from when they abandoned passenger service in 1960 till about 1965, they ran the PAs in freight service. And they even ran one on the local. That's called the backwards A. That's what we used to call it. And they ran from Oak Island to Manville and back. And there's a connecting track. It still exists between the Lehigh Valley or Conrail Lehigh line now and the Jersey Central Raritan Valley line. And sometimes trains would come up that when there was a wreck on the valley. It was a diversion route. And they also had a branch of the Reading called the Port Reading branch, which we published a book on recently. And here's a train going, it's a local, going to Union Carbide in Bound Brook. And Reading and CNJ occasionally pooled power. So this is a Reading freight that came up from Philadelphia with a Reading trainmaster. And here's the Saturday Wall Street with the moon rising above the F unit. Another day, another F unit. And the Reading in the yellow and green era ran freights from Eport. Here was another wreck. So they had a wreck train in Bound Brook with both of those trains again, number 5 and number 6. And a small FM on it. And the Reading Crusader had to go around this thing on the wrong main. They didn't have 261 back then, but they used hand throw crossover, so he got around it. So, I mean, today's world, they would just cancel service. They wouldn't ever think of something like, well, you got 4 tracks, just go around it, you know. Now, that was a Bud-built high-level coach that they were just road testing, running it up to Jersey City and back. Now, one day we went to Bound Brook, and we didn't know about this because we didn't have Facebook back then, but the original Reading Crusader was in Bound Brook, parked. It was in transit from the Reading to the CNJ on its way up to CN in Canada. CN bought it. This was built in the 1930s, and it went out of service around 1959, but it was the 5-car set intact. And we just happened to go to Bound Brook that day, and it was there, and we just stepped in it. So we got shots of it parked, and shortly after we got shots of it, a CNJ freight came by and picked it up and took it east. So you can see there it is, heading east. The first and last and only time I ever saw the Reading Silver Crusader.
Vote for Kennedy.
What?
The tank car says vote Kennedy.
Yeah, yeah. And this was a surprise. One day, Western Maryland Power came by on a B&O freight. Because remember, some freights were Jersey Central, some were Reading, and some were B&O. So even that had variety. And this is west of Bound Brook. That's 287 there with no traffic on it. Look at that. There's nothing going by on 287, no trucks. And this is standing on the guardrail on 287, shooting the westbound mail train with one of those passenger service equipped boxcars. They had a station at Calco, which was cyanamide. And there was only a couple of rush hour trains that stopped here for people that worked in Calco. Most of the trains did not stop there. There's one of those weird Jersey Central triple-headed signals with the signals offset. All that's gone now. It's all modern signals. Now there's a station there now for NJ Transit. Now RK Tower is which you can see over on the right-hand side of the picture. That's where the Reading swung off from the CNJ. So you're looking east toward Brook, and there's RK Tower on the right. I wish I had taken a picture of just the tower. But one of the problems was when you were young, like you were a teenager, like 13 or 14, and you have a roll of film, and it's a 20 exposure roll, and you're going on a Reading Iron Horse Ramble the next weekend, you didn't want to waste pictures on something silly like just a building. But I'm sorry I didn't take a whole picture of the tower because it was destroyed in a wreck a year or two later. So the Reading is swinging off on the right there. There's a grade crossing right here. That's what I'm shooting from. Grade crossing is still there. You can still get this angle. The signal bridge is gone. Tower's gone. Reading's gone. But other than that, most of the stuff is still there. Milepost 32 right there. FM coming west. So at one time it was 4 tracks to Raritan, then it was 3 tracks. And then eventually in the Aldine days, it went down to 2 tracks west of RK Tower. And now it's basically a 2-track main line the whole way. But it's signaled for 261, both directional traffic. Here's where the Reading swung off. The left 2 tracks are going to Philadelphia. The 3 tracks on the right are going to Raritan. They had a movable point frog for the Reading. So a B&O or Reading passenger train coming from Jersey City would diverge and diamond over the eastbound track. Now here's taking orders from the operator in the tower. He actually has the hoop out. And it was a manual tower, had manual levers. And here's the Reading Crusader on a summer evening heading west. And there is a Reading Iron Horse Ramble at it's called Bridgewater. That's the township that it's in, west of RK Tower. You can still drive in here. You can still get pictures, but this track is gone. But and that's from the signal bridge. You could do it back then and not get arrested. Now the Chimney Rock branch diverged just west of RK Tower and ran up to Chimney Rock Quarry. It still does. It's still there, and they pull ballast out for NJ Transit. It used to cross Route 22 at grade. That was a real nightmare. And they called it the Jersey Jump because when you're doing 60 miles an hour on 22 and you went over the train tracks, you became airborne. So the quarry had an interesting roster of engines. It was owned by an outfit called Hoodarley. And here's a critter. I'm not sure what that is, whether it's a Plymouth. Yeah. Not the truck, the train. But and then they had a crane of their own. They also loaded sand there. And then here's the Jersey Central drill in there working. So this was usually what the Brook drill that you saw before. That job made one trip up here every day. And they had a little yard there. There's still track there. And it doesn't cross 22 on grade anymore. It crosses on a bridge. Then they had this interesting critter here. It looks like a GE, but it's I'm not sure what it is. But they had that. You can see the CNJ engine in the background. And their crane, which was a motorized crane. It could move itself. And again, it was a place where you could just walk around and nobody would throw you out. They also leased Jersey Central HH 600, 1021, and they also had the 1023 there at one time. And then they bought it. There's the 1023. Very rare engine on any railroad. I have one in HO. But then they painted it orange, which was pretty neat. And then they decided to get real artsy-fartsy, and they painted it orange and tan. I'll show you a shot of that in a minute. But there was just so much variety back then. It just, your head spins now when everything just looks the same. And again, you could be walking around in an active quarry and nobody asked you, what are you doing here? That's when they painted it. And then, look at that. Is that classy or what? Yeah. And then it had a blue Jersey Central Jeep up there. Now, those gondola cars there are filled with boulders from the quarry, and they were going down the shore to make jetties to put out in the on the beaches to control beach erosion. There's a whole string of them over there on the left. And they were doing that for years. And this is on the portion of the Chimney Rock branch between Route 22, which is in the background, and the main line, the Raritan Valley line, which is behind me. They actually had a number of customers on here until Conrail came along and killed it all off. But you can see there's a customer on the left, there's freight cars going in on the right. So they had a fairly decent business. And that's kind of the heartbreak of railroading today. There's just no local business. It's just stack trains whizzing by. As you can see, the track could use some maintenance, but their attitude was, as long as we don't derail, doesn't matter. And if we do, well, then they'll clean it up. So Findurn was the next station, and that was actually a stop for a couple of trains, not many. Most of them just bypassed here. It was called Manville, Findurn. And there's still, I think, a large plastics customer here that gets covered hoppers. And they leased about 4 F units from Norfolk and Western in the late 1960s. So you could catch them running around. And that's the main bridge going up into Manville, which would be on your right. Now, Somerville is the next to last station. There's still a station here, and it's been rebuilt by NJ Transit. It used to have 4 tracks, one over on the right and one over on the left. Now there you can see the one on the left is already gone in this picture. One on the right is still there. And this is just west of Somerville Station. Like I said, there's 3 main tracks. It used to be 4. Raritan is straight ahead. Is that a mixed train? Well, usually these were coaches being shuttled to Eport car shops. Here's another cab ride. Engineer says, yeah, come on up. So I got a ride to Raritan one time. The only story that was really funny was the time we were riding on a passenger train, not in a cab. And instead of getting off in Bound we were coming back from Jersey City. Instead of getting off in Bound like we wanted to, we figured we'll ride to Raritan just for the hell of it, because it was a summer night and we had open windows, and we'll catch the next train back. Except there was no next train back. On Saturday nights, there was no 11 o'clock train back. So fortunately, when the conductor explained that to us, he offered to give us a ride back to Bound in his car. These are Homer Hill pictures, and that's the South Branch, which went off at Somerville and ran down to Flemington. And the Black River and Western had an opportunity to buy this line, but they didn't bother, which is a fatal flaw, because that would have been a great line to have for their tourist train. Here was an Armstrong turntable at, obviously, Turntable Junction, which is what they still call it. Neshannock Station Yeah, they still call it that. Yeah, there's a couple out. Yeah, that's still in. Notice the Bob Bar's cow shot there. And this is crossing the, was it the south branch of the Raritan River? Yeah, we finally made it to Raritan. So there's Jim Boyd Tower and operator giving a train order. Not entirely sure why they needed train orders, but because they had signals on the line. But maybe they were wrong railing. And that's Raritan Station. Notice all the old cars. So that pretty much dates it to the early 1960s. Two tracks diverged off the main line over there by the tower. And behind us is where the Raritan Yard is. They had this unusual signal bridge that had an extension over the left there to cover the two tracks that came out of the yard. The passenger trains to Allentown and Hampton would be on the main line over to the far left. And now we're in Raritan Yard, another place you could wander around to your heart's content. Nobody ever asked you what you were doing there or why you were there. You just took pictures. You could walk from one end to the other. Now, there's a mainline freight coming from Phillipsburg. And NJ Dot built a service and inspection building there in Raritan. That's that green building that you saw. And you could get your roster shots of coaches. So there's a combine, which a little unusual piece of equipment. There's your standard monitor roof Bethlehem steel coach. They had lots of them. And they did have a couple of club cars. They just had regular seats in them. They weren't like subscription cars like on the Lackawanna. They just had regular seats, but you had to be a member of the club to ride there. And they had white window shades. That's how you could tell the difference. And they had the name on the car. The yard was substantially rebuilt by NJ Dot / NJ Transit. It's in much better shape now. There's another small FM, which was unusual. Another variety of engines and coaches. Best time to go was on a weekend, because if you went there on a weekday, the whole yard would be empty. All the trains would be up in Jersey City. Here's an old shot from about 1962. So if you had nothing to do on a weekend, you took a train to Raritan, took all the roster shots in the yard, and then took a train back to Boundbrook, and then a bus home. There we are with a couple of big FMs. That's my favorite FM shot, 4 of them. Where'd you ever see 4 of them together? Notice the old switch lamp there. So we're getting close to the end here. Maybe a couple more shots. There's the service and inspection building that New Jersey Dot built, because CNJ never had 2 nickels to rub together. So the state had to pitch in and help. Notice the Bud car over on the left heading west. That's going out to Hampton. This was an unusual find. I have no idea why that was in Raritan Yard, where it was going, who bought it, or what. And I think this is the last slide. That's at Bound Brook, and sort of, you always have to have a caboose shot for your going away shot. Friendly employees. Thank you.
All right, thank you everybody for attending. We will publish the recording on YouTube in a couple days or so and on our website. Thank you for tuning in, and next presentation will be the second Thursday in November, virtual only. Thank you and good night.